The day David died began like every other day for the past 5 years, with the soft, pale light of dawn spilling over the Coyote Hills and the rich, earthy smell of coffee. Clara stood on the porch of the small, sturdy cabin they had built with their own hands, a tin mug warming her palms. She watched David as he moved through the early morning mist, his broad shoulders and steady gait a familiar comfort. He was checking the fence line near the creek, a simple, repetitive task that was the bedrock of their simple, repetitive, and deeply cherished life. This land was their sanctuary. They had carved it out of the wilderness with sweat, grit, and a shared dream of a life untouched by the violence and chaos that defined so much of the territory. Here, the only currency was the changing of the seasons, the only law was the rising and setting of the sun. David, with his quiet strength and gentle hands that could mend a bird's wing as easily as they could split a log, was the heart of this sanctuary. He was a good man, a simple man. He was her whole world. He finished his work and walked back towards the cabin, his face breaking into a warm smile as he saw her. "You're going to wear a hole in that porch step, staring at me like that," he said, his voice a low, pleasant rumble. "Someone has to make sure you're doing the job right," she teased, handing him his own mug of coffee. He took it, his fingers brushing against hers. It was a small touch, one they had shared 1,000 times, but it still sent a familiar warmth through her. He looked out at their land's small field of corn, the vegetable garden she so meticulously tended, the vast, open sky in the shadow, brief but perceptible, crossed his face. "Everything all right?" she asked. He blinked, the shadow gone as quickly as it came. "Just thinking," he said, forcing a smile. "Just grateful." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, silver locket, intricately carved with the image of a lone hawk. "I wanted to give you this." It was beautiful, clearly old and valuable. "David, where did you get this?" "It's too much." "An heirloom," he said, his voice a little too quiet. "From a life I left behind a long time ago. I want you to have it. Wear it. It'll keep you safe." He put it around her neck, his fingers fumbling slightly with the clasp. His hands, usually so steady, were trembling. Before she could question him further, he kissed her forehead and turned back to his work, leaving her with the cold weight of the locket against her skin and a new, unsettling feeling in her heart. The riders came an hour later. They did not approach like weary travelers. They descended from the hills like a plague of locusts, 7 of them, their horses moving with a predatory speed. They were hard men, their faces etched with the cruelty of the trail, their eyes holding a dead, cold light. At their lead rode a man with a face like a knotted piece of old wood, a long scar bisecting his left eyebrow and giving him a permanent, malevolent sneer. David saw them first. He was by the well, drawing water. He dropped the bucket, and his hand went instinctively to the Colt pistol on his hip, a gun she had only ever seen him use to shoot snakes or scare off coyotes. His entire posture changed. The gentle farmer vanished, replaced by a man she didn't recognize, a man whose body went rigid with a kind of cold, dangerous stillness. "Clara," he said, his voice low and urgent, not turning his head. "Get in the cabin. Bar the door. Hide." "David, who are they?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just do it. Now." She ran, her heart hammering against her ribs. She slammed the heavy oak door and dropped the bar, her hands shaking so badly she could barely manage it. She ran to the window, peering through a small crack in the curtain. The lead rider reined in his horse just feet from David, the other 6 fanning out in a half-circle, trapping him. "Deacon," the leader said, the name sounding like a curse. "I'll be damned. We finally found you." "Deacon." Clara's mind recoiled. His name was David. David said nothing, his hand hovering over the butt of his pistol. The leader, Silas Kane, chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "You look good, Deacon. Soft. This little farmer's life seems to suit you. But I think you have something that belongs to us. The Black Creek payroll. $50,000 in gold. You remember that day, don't you? The day you left us all to die in that ambush and vanished with the score." Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her. Black Creek. She'd heard the stories. A brutal, bloody robbery 10 years ago. A gang called the Black Creek Marauders had ambushed an army payroll, leaving a dozen soldiers dead. The gold was never found, and the gang had scattered. "My name is David," he said, his voice as hard as granite. That man is dead. He ain't dead enough, Cain sneered. We spent 10 years looking for you. 10 years of chasing ghosts and rumors. Now, you're going to tell me where you hid our gold. And then, we're going to give you the death you should have gotten a decade ago. There's nothing for you here, David said. Ride out, and you can live. Cain laughed again. That's the deacon I remember. Always making threats he can't back up. He gave a slight nod. It happened so fast. One of the riders drew his gun, but David was faster. Impossibly fast. His Colt was in his hand, barking fire before the other man's gun had even cleared his holster. The rider clutched his chest and toppled from his saddle. For a moment, there was a stunned silence. Then all hell broke loose. The remaining 5 riders opened fire. David dove behind the stone wall of the well, returning fire with a calm, deadly efficiency that was terrifying to behold. This was not a farmer defending his home. This was a professional at his bloody work. He shot another man from his horse, the rider's leg buckling beneath him. But he was 1 man against 5. A bullet tore through his shoulder, spinning him round. He grunted in pain but stayed on his feet, firing again. Clara screamed, a sound swallowed by the thunder of the guns. She fumbled for the old shotgun they kept over the mantel, her mind a whirlwind of terror and confusion. Who was this man she had married? Before she could reach the door, she saw Cain dismount. He wasn't firing. He was walking calmly through the gunfight, a long, wicked-looking knife in his hand. While David was pinned down by the gunfire, Cain circled the well. David saw him at the last second. He turned, his gun empty. He tried to raise it to use as a club, but Cain was too close. The knife flashed, a silver arc in the morning sun. It plunged deep into David's side. He gasped, his eyes wide with shock and pain, and fell to his knees. The shooting stopped. Cain stood over him, a triumphant, demonic look on his face. The gold deacon. Last chance. David looked past him, his eyes finding the cabin window, finding Clara. He mouthed a single, silent word. Run. Then he spat a mouthful of blood onto Cain's boots and laughed, a choked, defiant sound. Cain's face contorted in a mask of pure fury. He raised the knife again and brought it down. Clara turned away, a strangled sob tearing from her throat as she heard the sickening, final sound. She heard them ransacking the cabin, tearing it apart. Find it, Cain roared. It has to be here. They smashed and broke and destroyed everything they had built. But they did not find what they were looking for. Burn it, Cain said finally, his voice cold with frustration. Burn it all. Let the buzzards pick his bones. She heard the crackle of flames. Smoke began to pour through the cracks in the floorboards. She had to get out. The cellar. She scrambled to the trapdoor hidden under a rug, pulled it open, and descended into the darkness just as the cabin's main door was kicked in. She huddled in the dark, listening to the roar of the fire and the triumphant laughter of the men as they rode away, leaving her buried alive in the tomb of her life. She waited, choking on the smoke, until the last hoofbeat faded. When she finally pushed open the cellar door, she emerged into a world of ash and silence. The cabin was a funeral pyre. The sun was blotted out by a column of black smoke. And her David, her simple, good David, lay broken and still in the dust. Her grief was a physical thing, a crushing weight that stole the air and the light. But as she knelt by his body, her hand fell upon the hawk locket he had given her. It'll keep you safe. It wasn't a promise. It was a clue. As the sun began to set on the ruins of her world, a new, cold feeling began to crystallize in the depths of her sorrow. It was a question. And it was a purpose. She had buried the man she loved. Now she had to find out who he truly was. Grief is a fire. In the first hours, it consumes everything, a roaring, indiscriminate inferno of pain and loss. Clara let it burn. She knelt in the dust beside David's body, oblivious to the heat from the smoldering ruins of their home, oblivious to the passing of time. The world was a blur of smoke and tears. But as the night grew deep and cold, and the last embers of her life died down, the nature of the fire within her began to change. The wild, chaotic flames of sorrow banked down into a single, intensely hot coal of pure, unadulterated rage. They had not just killed her husband. They had executed a stranger and, in doing so, had revealed that her entire life was a lie. The name they had called him echoed in her mind. The speed of his draw, the cold efficiency of his gunmanship, the story of a 10-year-old robbery. It was a puzzle, and the bloody, broken man at her feet was its centerpiece. Before the sun rose again, she buried him. She used her own hands to dig in the hard and forgiving earth of her vegetable garden, a place of life now consecrated for death. Her nails broke, her fingers bled, but she did not stop until the grave was deep and safe. She wrapped him in the one quilt that had been thrown clear of the cabin, a blue and white pattern she had stitched herself during their first winter together. As she covered him with the final shovelful of dirt, she did not weep. The time for tears was over. She made a vow, a silent promise whispered into the cold pre-dawn air. She would know the truth, and the men who had done this would pay for it. The hawk locket. It'll keep you safe. It was the only thread she had to pull. She examined it closely in the first light of dawn. The craftsmanship was exquisite. The hawk's eye was a tiny, perfectly set sapphire. She pressed on it, twisted it, looked for a seam. Nothing. Then, remembering how David's hands had trembled when he put it on her, she focused on the clasp. It was stiff, unusual. She pressed on a small, almost invisible pin on its side, and the back of the locket sprang open. Inside, there was no miniature portrait, no lock of hair. There was a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. A key. Not a physical key, but a cipher. It was a series of numbers and letters, 3R12, 7L4, 1R8. Below it was a simple, hand-drawn sketch of a hearthstone. Their hearthstone. It was one of the few things to survive the fire, a massive slab of granite, cracked and blackened but still intact. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar feeling, sparked within her. She found a discarded piece of timber to use as a lever and went to work. The stone was immensely heavy. It took her the better part of an hour, her muscles screaming in protest, to shift it. Beneath it was a hollow space. And in that space, there was a heavy, iron-banded chest. It was not locked with a key, but with a combination dial. It took her a moment to understand the cipher. 3R12, 3 full turns to the right, stopping on 12. 7L4, 7 full turns to the left, stopping on 4. 1R8, 1 final turn to the right, stopping on 8. She turned the dial, her heart pounding. With a heavy, satisfying clunk, the lock disengaged. She lifted the lid. The contents of the chest stole her breath. This was not the inheritance of a simple farmer. This was the legacy of the man named Deacon. On top lay to match cold peacemakers, their barrels a deep, lustrous blue, their grips made of polished, yellowed ivory. They were heavy, beautiful, and deadly. Beneath them were cartridge belts, a whetstone, cleaning kits, and a wicked-looking hunting knife with a blade of dark, Damascus steel. And at the very bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick, leather-bound journal. With trembling hands, she opened it. The first page read, "My name is David Kane. They used to call me Deacon. This is the story of how I died, and how I hope to live." She sat there amidst the ruins of her home and read. She read for hours, the sun climbing high in the sky, her grief forgotten, replaced by a stunned, horrified fascination. The journal told a story of a different man, a man raised in the hard-scrabble world of mining camps and border towns. An orphan who fell in with a charismatic, ruthless outlaw named Silas Canewell had taken David under his wing and given him a new surname, marking him as his protege. He described the formation of the Black Creek Marauders, the string of robberies, the escalating violence. He wrote of his growing disillusionment, his disgust with Kane's casual brutality. And then he wrote of the Black Creek payroll robbery. He described how it was a setup, an ambush where Kane had planned not just to steal the gold, but to eliminate a rival faction within his own gang. David, realizing he was next on the list, had acted first. During the firefight, he had grabbed the saddlebags containing the gold, killed the men Kane had sent to betray him, and vanished into the chaos, leaving both the law and his former mentor to believe he had perished with the others. The final entries were about her. He wrote of how he had drifted for a year, a haunted man, before finding this valley, this sanctuary. He wrote of seeing her for the first time, and of how he had decided to bury Deacon for good, to become the simple man he believed she deserved. "She is my redemption," he wrote. "I have buried the gold. I have buried my guns. I have buried my name. I pray to God they all stay in the ground forever." The journal was his confession. and it was her inheritance. Tucked into the back cover was a hand-drawn map, a detailed map of the surrounding territory. On it were several marked locations. One was labeled the cache, located in a place called Ghost Canyon. That had to be the gold. But there were other marks, each with a name next to it. Lefty Pete the Watering Hole Saloon, Dust Devil Point. Nash the Tracker, lives in the rocks above Ter's Cruces. Dutch the Gunsmith, runs a shop in Purgatory Flats. It was a list of the surviving members of the Black Creek Marauders. It was a kill list. Clara closed the journal. The world had shifted on its axis. The man she had loved and mourned was a lie. A beautiful, wonderful lie, but a lie nonetheless. He was a thief, a killer, and a traitor. But he had also been a man who had desperately tried to be good, who had died to protect her. And she had loved him. The grief and the rage and the betrayal swirled within her, a toxic, potent brew. What was she supposed to do? Mourn the farmer, or avenge the outlaw? She looked down at the ivory-gripped Colts. They felt impossibly heavy. She had shot a gun before. David had insisted she learn to use the old shotgun for protection. But this was different. This was his world. This was the world that had taken him from her. She made her choice. She could not bring back the farmer she had loved. But she could honor his last, desperate fight. She could finish the war he had started 10 years ago. She would use his knowledge, his weapons, his past. She would unbury Deacon, not to forgive him, but to wield him like a weapon. She spent the rest of the day practicing. She strapped on the gun belts, the weight unfamiliar and yet strangely balancing. She loaded the Colts, the metallic click of the cylinders a new and terrible language. She fired at old tins and bottles, her hands shaking at first, the recoil jarring her to the bone. But she remembered the things David had taught her about the shotgun breathing, the stance, the slow, steady squeeze of the trigger. Slowly, her hands steadied. Her aim improved. By sunset, she could hit a bottle from 30 paces, not every time, but enough. She packed a saddlebag with the journal, ammunition, a small amount of food she salvaged from the cellar, and a water skin. She put on David's old, worn duster, a piece of the man she had loved to wrap herself in as she went to hunt the men he had hated. She saddled the one horse the marauders had left behind, a spirited bay that had been David's. As she mounted, she looked at the fresh grave one last time. "I don't know who you were, David Kane," she whispered, her voice raw. "But I know who I am. I am your widow, and I am your vengeance." She turned the horse south, towards Dust Devil Point, towards a man named Lefty Pete. She was no longer just Clara. She was the inheritor of a stranger's past, and she would use it to pay for her future, one body at a time. Dust Devil Point was less a town and more a collection of sun-bleached shacks clinging to a rock, perpetually scoured by a wind that tasted of grit and regret. Its heart and soul, if it could be said to have either, was the Watering Hole Saloon, a place where men went to forget their sins or to plan new ones. According to David's journal, it was the favorite haunt of a man named Lefty Pete, a marauder known more for his loud mouth and his love of cheap whiskey than for his skill with a gun. He was, the journal noted, the weakest link in the chain. For Clara, that made him the perfect place to start. She rode into town not as a warrior, but as a ghost. She wore a simple homesteader's dress she had managed to salvage, her hair tucked up under a bonnet. David's duster and his guns were wrapped in a bedroll and tied to her saddle. To any casual observer, she was just another woman beaten down by the trail, perhaps searching for a runaway husband or a new start. Invisibility, she knew, was a weapon. She took a room at the town's only boarding house, a grimy establishment run by a weary-eyed woman who didn't bother to ask her name. From her second-story window, she had a clear view of the saloon's entrance. For 2 days, she watched. She learned the town's rhythm, the comings and goings of its transient population. And she saw him. Lefty Pete was exactly as the journal described, a large, slovenly man with a booming laugh and a hand that was never far from a whiskey bottle. He spent his days at a poker table in the corner of the saloon, bragging to anyone who would listen about his past glories, though the stories were always vague, never mentioning names or places. Clara's plan was simple, born from the cold logic she was beginning to discover within herself. A direct confrontation was foolish. She needed to isolate him, to take him on her own terms, away from the prying eyes and ready guns of the saloon. David's journal had provided the key. Pete has a weakness for things that glitter. He believes the story of the lost Dutchman's gold as if it were scripture. He can't resist the promise of an easy score. On the third night, she made her move. She changed into a dark riding skirt and blouse, strapping on David's gun belt under the cover of her room's darkness. The weight of the ivory-gripped Colts was a cold, reassuring pressure on her hips. She slipped out of the boarding house and made her way to the livery stable where Pete kept his horse. In the pocket of his saddlebag, she planted her bait, a small, rough-looking map drawn on a piece of aged parchment she had created using coffee grounds and the heat from her lamp. The map was a crude rendering of the hills just outside of town, with a large X marking a spot in a narrow box canyon. Along with the map, she placed a single, small gold nuggetone she had found in David's chest, likely a souvenir from his own prospecting days. She then returned to the saloon. She did not enter. She paid a young stable boy a nickel to deliver a message. Tell the man they call Lefty Pete that a friend of Deacon has a message for him. Tell him to check his saddle. She retreated to the shadows of the alley across the street and waited. 10 minutes later, Pete stumbled out of the saloon, a confused and suspicious look on his face. He lumbered over to the livery. A few minutes later, he emerged, his movements now furtive and excited. He looked around, trying to see if he was being watched, before quickly untying his horse and riding out of town, heading directly for the hills marked on the map. The bait had been taken. Clara retrieved her own horse and followed, keeping a safe distance. She was not a natural tracker, but Pete, in his drunken excitement, was leaving a trail a child could follow. He rode straight to the box canyon. As he disappeared into its narrow entrance, Clara dismounted, tethering her horse. The final lesson was about to begin. The canyon was a trap, with steep rock walls and only one way in or out. Pete was at the far end, already digging frantically at the base of a large rock formation with a small spade from his saddlebag. He was completely oblivious, his greed having blinded him to the world. Clara drew one of David's Colts. The sound of the hammer being cocked was unnaturally loud in the enclosed space. Pete froze. He dropped his spade and slowly turned, his hand hovering over his own gun. When he saw her, a woman standing alone at the mouth of the canyon, his fear turned to a sneering confusion. "Well, now," he said, his voice slick with false confidence. "What's a pretty little thing like you doing all the way out here? You the one sent that message?" "I am," Clara said, her voice surprisingly steady. The gun in her hand felt like an extension of her arm. "I have a message for you from Deacon." Pete's sneer vanished, replaced by a pale, slack-jawed shock. The name hit him like a physical blow. "Deacon's dead," he stammered. "He is," Clara confirmed. "I'm his widow. And you were there the day he died. I saw you. You were the one who set fire to my home." Recognition dawned in his eyes, followed by pure, animal terror. "Now, hold on, Missy. That wasn't my idea. That was Kane. I was just—" "You were just following orders," Clara finished, her voice dripping with contempt. "That's what they all say. You have two choices. You can tell me everything you know about Kane's plans, and I'll make your death quick. Or you can draw that gun, and we can see if your luck has improved." Pete was sweating, his eyes darting around as if looking for an escape that wasn't there. He was a bully and a coward, not a fighter. But he was also a cornered animal. With a desperate yell, he grabbed for his gun. He was clumsy, his movements slowed by whiskey and fear. Clara, fueled by adrenaline and hours of practice, was not. She did not think. She simply reacted, as David had taught her. She squeezed the trigger. The Colt bucked in her hand, the roar of the shot echoing off the canyon walls. A red flower bloomed on Pete's chest. He stared down at it, a look of profound surprise on his face, before his knees buckled and he collapsed into the dust. Silence descended. The smell of gunpowder was sharp and acrid. Clara stood there, the smoking gun still in her hand, her body trembling not from fear, but from the receding wave of adrenaline. She had done it. She had taken a human life. She had expected to feel triumph, or disgust, or even remorse. Instead, she felt a profound and chilling emptiness. She had crossed the line, and she knew, with absolute certainty, that she could never go back. She walked over to the body, her legs feeling unsteady. She looked down at the man who had helped destroy her life. He was just a pathetic, dead man now. There was no victory here. There was only the grim mathematics of vengeance. 1 down, 5 to go. She reloaded the empty chamber, the simple, mechanical action a strangely calming ritual. She left the map and the gold nugget where they lay. The story in Dust Devil Point would be that Lefty Pete had been killed over a treasure map. No one would ever connect his death to a quiet homesteader's widow. She rode out of the canyon without looking back, leaving the desert wind to whisper the first chapter of her bloody new legend. News travels fast in the territory, but the truth travels slow. The story that trickled out of Dust Devil Point was of a drunken fool named Pete killed in a dispute over a treasure map. DeSilas Kane and the remaining marauders, holed up in the lawless border town of Tres Cruces. It was a meaningless piece of frontier violence, a fitting end for a liability like Lefty. They gave it no further thought. They were too busy celebrating, spending their loot from Clara's homestead, and planning their next move. Their arrogance was a shield, but Clara had just punched the first crack in it. She knew the story of Pete's death wouldn't be enough to spook them. She needed to deliver a more personal message, one that would tell them, without a doubt, that Deacon's ghost was coming for them. Her next target was Nash, the man the journal described as more wolf than man, a tracker who can follow a whisper on the wind. He was Kane's eyes and ears. Taking him out would not only be another act of vengeance, it would blind her enemies. According to the journal, Nash didn't live in the squalor of town with the others. He preferred the solitude of the rocks and caves in the hills above Tres Cruces, a network of canyons and mesas he knew better than anyone. He was a hunter, and to beat him, Clara knew she would have to become better prey. She approached Tres Cruces with extreme caution. This was not the backwater of Dust Devil Point. This was a true den of thieves, and the marauders would be on high alert. She did not enter the town. Instead, she spent 3 days in the surrounding hills, the very terrain Nash called his home. She moved slowly, meticulously, using David's map and her own growing instincts. She was not just looking for Nash, she was learning his territory. She found his hidden trails, the small, almost invisible signs he used to mark his way. She found a small, sheltered cave with a hidden spring, a place he likely used as a base. And in that cave, she found her message. Tucked into a crevice was one of Nash's spare shirts. It was a distinctive red flannel, the same kind she had seen on one of the men who had attacked her home. She took it. This would be her calling card. Her plan was one of high risk and psychological warfare. She needed to kill one of the marauders not in the wilderness, but right under Kane's nose, and leave a message that only they would understand. Her target was a man named Fletcher, a nervous, rat-faced outlaw who, according to David's journal, always took the last watch, from the darkest hours before dawn until sunrise. For 2 nights, she observed their camp from a high ridge, using David's spyglass. They had taken over a small, abandoned adobe house at the edge of town, its position offering a clear field of fire. Fletcher was predictable. At 4 in the morning, he would emerge and begin his patrol, a slow circle around the house, his rifle held loosely in his hands, his mind clearly on the sleep he was missing. On the 3rd night, she put her plan into motion. She was armed not with a pistol, but with David's Winchester rifle and the Damascus steel hunting knife. She moved under the cover of a moonless, starless sky, a patch of true darkness that swallowed all light. She didn't approach the adobe directly. Instead, she circled wide, coming in from the rear, from the direction of the steep, rocky hills. She found her spot, a shallow ditch 100 yards from the house. She lay there, her body pressed flat against the earth, the rifle resting on a small pile of rocks, its sights trained on the path Fletcher would walk. She became part of the landscape, her breathing slow and steady, her presence erased by the overwhelming dark. She waited for an hour. The cold of the ground seeped into her bones. Her muscles ached, but she did not move. She was a statue of vengeance. At 4 o'clock, as predicted, the door of the adobe creaked open and Fletcher emerged, yawning. He began his lazy patrol. He walked the path once, twice. On the 3rd circuit, as he passed a point directly in her line of sight, his back to the hills, Clara took a deep breath, let half of it out, and squeezed the trigger. The Winchester's report was a single, sharp crack, instantly swallowed by the vast emptiness of the desert. Fletcher collapsed without a sound, a clean shot through the back. The reaction from the adobe was instantaneous. Lights appeared in the windows. Shouts of alarm echoed through the pre-dawn quiet. But they didn't know where the shot had come from. They fired blindly into the darkness, their panic shots going wide. They were shooting at a ghost. While they were distracted, Clara moved. She did not retreat. She advanced. She ran, hunched low, directly towards the body. The men inside were still trying to figure out what was happening. Reaching Fletcher, she worked quickly. She unbuttoned his shirt and stuffed the red flannel shirt belonging to Nash inside it, against his cooling skin. Then she took the Damascus knife and, with a single, decisive motion, she pinned a corner of the red shirt to Fletcher's chest, driving the blade deep into the earth beneath him. Then she was gone, melting back into the hills as silently as she had come, leaving her gruesome message behind. When the sun rose, Silas Kane and his men finally ventured out. What they found chilled them to the bone. Fletcher was dead, that much was obvious. But it was the message they found that turned their blood to ice. The red shirt was unmistakably Nash's. And the knife Kane recognized it instantly. It was Deacon's knife, a unique blade David had won in a poker game years ago. The implications were terrifying. The shot had come from the hills, from Nash's territory. It was Nash's shirt. But it was Deacon's knife. It was an impossible, horrifying puzzle. Had Nash betrayed them? Was he working with someone? Or was it something else? Was it Deacon himself, returned from the grave to reclaim what was his, one piece at a time? The certainty of their safety was shattered. Lefty Pete's death was no longer a random event. It was the opening move in a game they didn't understand. They were being hunted. Kane, his face a thunderous mask of rage and a new, unfamiliar fear, looked up at the silent, watching hills. He had sent a brute squad to kill a farmer. He now realized he had kicked open the door to hell itself. Nash, he roared, his voice echoing in the morning air. Get down here. Find him. Find who did this. I don't care if it's a man or a ghost. You find him and you bring me his head. The scent of the hunter was on the wind now. And for the first time, Silas Kane understood that the roles had been reversed. He was no longer the predator. He was the prey. Nash was more animal than man, a creature of instinct and observation. When Kane showed him the body of Fletcher's red shirt, the familiar knife had felt not fear, but a cold, professional fury. This was an insult to his craft. Someone had used his methods, his territory, to mock him, to sow chaos. He did not believe in ghosts. He believed in tracks, signs, and the tangible evidence of human passage. And he would find the person responsible. He began his hunt not with a rifle, but with his eyes. He ignored the panicked tracks of the marauders and cast a wide circle around the adobe. It took him 2 hours, but he found it, a single, scuffed boot print in the ditch where the shooter had lain. The print was small, light. It was a woman's. He found where she had retreated into the hills, her path chosen with an expert's care to minimize tracks. This was no simple homesteader's wife. This was someone who knew what they were doing. Someone who had been taught. The hunt became a deadly, intricate dance. Nash was the wolf, legendary in his ability to follow a trail. But Clara, armed with David's journal, had the wolf's playbook. The journal contained a whole chapter on Nash, on his tracking methods, his habits, his mindset. Nash never follows the obvious path, David had written. He reads the land, anticipates where his prey will go to find water, shelter. He doesn't follow your tracks, he meets you at your destination. Clara knew she could not outrun him. She had to outthink him. She had to use his own strengths against him. She did not flee south to Mexico. She headed deeper into the unforgiving labyrinth of canyons and Mesosnish's own hunting grounds. She laid a false trail heading south, a deliberately obvious path for any amateur to follow. Then she doubled back, walking backwards in her own footsteps for half a mile, before scaling a sheer rock face to a high ledge, a path that left no tracks. She was deliberately playing his game. For 2 days, the silent duel continued. Nash, discovering the false trail, was not fooled. He knew it was a deception. He began to read the land, to anticipate her. He knew she would need water. There were only 3 hidden springs in this part of the range. He would check them all. Clara, anticipating this, went to the first spring. She did not drink from it. Instead, She used a small piece of cloth to soak up water and then created another false trail, this one leading into a dead-end box canyon. At the end of the canyon, she left a single, .10 .44 cartridge of kind David's Colts used in the dust. It was another piece of the puzzle for him, another breadcrumb designed to lead him down the wrong mental path. She then circled back to the second spring, the one nearest his hidden base, and replenished her water skin, confident he would check the most obvious one first. On the third day, she knew the dance had to end. She was running low on supplies, and the constant tension was wearing her down. She had to turn the trap. The journal had given her one last, crucial piece of information. Nash has one vanity. He believes no one can move more quietly in the rocks than he can. He is proud of his stealth. He will always try to get above his prey for the final kill. She chose her ground, a narrow pass between two towering rock formations, a place known as the Needle's Eye. It was the only way through the ridge for miles. She knew Nash would anticipate her using it. She entered the pass, but did not go through. Instead, she painstakingly created a scene. She scuffed the ground, making it look like she had stumbled. She dropped a small, empty food pouch. She made it look like a tired, desperate person had just passed through. Then, she retreated and began the arduous task of climbing the eastern wall of the pass. The climb was perilous, her fingers and feet searching for tiny holes in the sheer rock. When she reached a ledge 40 feet up, she found her perch. It was a shallow alcove, barely big enough for her, but it offered a perfect, concealed view of the pass below. From here, she could see anyone who entered. And, more importantly, she could see the opposite canyon wall. She waited. For hours, she remained as still as the rock around her, the sun beating down, her rifle resting before her. The silence was absolute. Just after midday, she saw him. He did not enter the pass. Just as David had predicted, Nash appeared on the crest of the western wall, the wall opposite her. He moved with a fluid, silent grace, a wolf in his element. He had circled around, coming in from above, seeking the high ground to ambush his prey. He scanned the pass below, his eyes sharp and focused, looking for her. He never thought to look up and across. He was so confident in his own stealth, he never considered that his prey might be using his own tactic against him. He spotted the signs she had left below the scuff marks, the pouch. A small, almost imperceptible smile of triumph touched his lips. He thought she was just ahead, tired and stumbling. He began to move along the ridge, preparing to descend behind her and end the hunt. He was completely exposed. Nash, Clara's voice was quiet, yet it carried clearly across the narrow pass. He froze, every muscle in his body going rigid. He spun around, his rifle coming up, his eyes finally scanning the opposite wall. He saw her then, a small figure in a rocky alcove, her rifle already aimed at his heart. The look on his face was not fear. It was a profound, professional shock, the look of a master chess player who has just been checkmated in a way he never thought possible. The prey had become the hunter. "You're good," he said, his voice a low growl of respect. "Deacon taught you." "He taught me everything I needed to know about you," Clara replied, her voice cold and steady. There were no more words. Nash was not a man to beg or plead. He was a wolf, and wolves die fighting. He tried to bring his rifle to bear, a desperate, last-ditch effort. But Clara was ready. She had already won the duel. The shot was just the final move. She fired, and the bullet crossed the expanse of the pass, true and straight. Nash was thrown backward, his rifle clattering on the rocks. He teetered on the edge of the ridge for a long, silent moment, a dark silhouette against the bright blue sky. Then he fell, tumbling down the sheer rock face to the canyon floor below. Clara did not watch him fall. She calmly ejected the spent cartridge, the metallic sound echoing in the pass. She had faced the wolf in his own den and won. She had blinded Silas Kane. But as she began her careful descent, she knew that the rest of the pack, now wounded and blind, would be more dangerous and desperate than ever. The death of Nash was not a whisper, it was a thunderclap that shook the foundations of Silas Kane's confidence. Fletcher's death had been a mystery, a ghost story. Nash's was a declaration of war. He was their best. He was the wolf who could not be caged, the hunter who could not be eluded. And he had been taken down in his own territory. Kane finally understood the truth. This was not a ghost. This was Deacon's widow. and she was using Deacon's own knowledge, his own playbook, to dismantle them. Panic began to fester among the remaining marauders. They were gunmen and thieves, not soldiers fighting a ghost who knew their every secret. They were bunkered in the adobe, but it no longer felt like a fortress, it felt like a tomb. Kane knew he had to regain the initiative. He couldn't wait for her to pick them off one by one. He had to draw her out. He had to set a trap of his own. His mind turned to the last two names on the list, the last two members of their shattered fraternity, Dutch, the gunsmith, and the gold itself. Clara, having retrieved David's journal from her saddlebags, was already focused on her next target. Dutch is a master craftsman, David had written. A strange bird. He loves the mechanics of a gun more than the killing. He can make a pistol sing. After the Black Creek mess, he set up a shop in Purgatory Flats. He's the only one of us who ever tried to build something instead of just taking. Purgatory Flats. It was a cesspool of a town, a place even more lawless than Dos Cruces. But it was her next destination. She knew Kane would be expecting her. The death of his tracker would have sent him into a rage. He would be looking for her. She had to assume that any direct approach was a trap. She rode towards Purgatory Flats, but did not enter the town. Instead, she circled it, finding a high vantage point to observe. Just as she suspected, Kane's men were there, not hiding, but making their presence known, swaggering through the streets. It was a crude but clear bait. They were daring her to come into the open. She needed a way to get to Dutch without walking into Kane's snare. The journal, as always, provided the key. Dutch is a creature of habit. Every third day, at dawn, he rides out to the old abandoned silver mine in the foothills to test his new creations. He says the acoustics in the main cavern are perfect for hearing the music of the action. This was her chance to meet him on neutral ground, away from Kane's eyes. She checked the date. The next day was the third day. At dawn, she was in position, hidden in a cluster of rocks overlooking the trail to the old silver mine. Soon, she saw him. He was an older man, with a thick gray beard and the powerful, stooped shoulders of a blacksmith. He rode with a long, leather rifle case strapped to his saddle. He looked nothing like a killer. He looked like an artisan. She let him pass, then followed him to the mine. The entrance was a dark hole in the side of the mountain. Dutch dismounted, took out his rifle, and walked inside. Clara followed, one of David's Colts in her hand, her footsteps silent. The main cavern opened up before her, a vast, cathedral-like space. The air was cool and smelled of damp stone and gunpowder. Dutch was at the far end, lighting a series of lanterns. He took the rifle from its case. It was a beautiful piece of work, its stock a polished, dark walnut, its barrel a gleaming blue-black. "It's a beautiful weapon, Dutch," Clara said, her voice echoing in the vast space. Dutch spun around, his own pistol in his hand in a movement surprisingly fast for a man his age. He saw her standing in the shadows, a woman alone, and his face registered confusion, not immediate fear. "Who are you?" he demanded. "A message from Deacon," she said. His face went pale. He lowered his pistol slightly. "Deacon's dead. Kane killed him." "Yes," Clara said. "I'm his wife." A look of profound, weary sadness crossed the old gunsmith's face. He holstered his pistol. "I figured this day would come," he sighed. "I never took a liking to Kane, or the life. After Black Creek I just wanted to build things, not break them." "You were there," Clara said, her voice hard, her gun still steady. "You rode with them. You stood by while they murdered my husband, while they burned my home." "I never fired a shot, ma'am," he said quietly. "I swear on my mother's grave. I told Kane it was wrong. He and the boys, they were lost. I was a coward. I should have stood up to him then. But I didn't." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, abiding regret. "I won't make that mistake again. I'm not going to draw on you. I'll tell you whatever you want to know, and then you can do what you have to do." His surrender was so complete, so unexpected, that it threw Clara off balance. She had come prepared for a fight, for another life to take. She was not prepared for a confession. "Kane is in Purgatory Flats," he said. "He's waiting for you. He thinks you'll come for me. It's a trap, but it's not the real one. The real trap is the gold. The cache in Ghost Canyon," Clara said. Dutch nodded. "He knows Deacon's woman would know where it is. He's left Purgatory Flats guarded by two of his men, a big show to keep you focused here. But he and his last man, a snake named Reno, have ridden for Ghost Canyon. He's going to wait for you there. He figures you'll come for the gold sooner or later, and he'll kill you and take the prize in one clean sweep. The pieces clicked into place. Kane was playing a longer game. He was using his own men as bait. "Why are you telling me this?" Clara asked, her suspicion warring with the sincerity in the old man's eyes. "Because your husband Deacon David, he gave me a second chance once," Dutch said. "After a robbery went bad. He told the posse I'd gone the other way. He let me escape. He said I wasn't cut out for the life. He was right." He looked at the beautiful rifle in his hands. "This is what I'm meant for. Not killing. I owe him a debt, and I owe you one." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, expertly crafted derringer. This was a special commission for Kane. He wanted a hidden weapon. It's balanced for throwing. The trigger guard is sharpened like a blade. He slid it across the cavern floor towards her. "You're going to need more than just a pistol to face him. Take it. For David." Clara looked at the small, deadly weapon, then back at the old gunsmith. Her quest for vengeance had been a simple, black and white affair. Kill the men who killed her husband. But Dutch was something else. A man trapped by his past, filled with regret. To kill him would not be justice. It would be an execution. "Get on your horse and ride," Clara said, lowering her colt. "Ride east. Don't stop until you hit the ocean. Don't ever look back." Tears welled in the old man's eyes. "Thank you, Mum," he whispered. "God bless you." He turned and walked out of the mine without a backward glance. Clara stood alone in the cavern, the derringer in her hand. She had shown mercy, an act she would have thought impossible just a week ago. She did not know if it was a moment of weakness or a flicker of the woman she used to be. But she knew one thing. The final confrontation was at hand. She was going to Ghost Canyon. She was going to walk into the Devil's Workshop. Ghost Canyon was a place of ghosts and whispers. A maze of towering, wine-scoured sandstone formations that looked like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. The wind moaned through the narrow passages, creating an eerie, mournful sound that gave the canyon its name. It was the perfect place for a final, bloody showdown. It was David's bank, and Silas Kane was planning to make it Clara's tomb. Clara rode with a cold, clear purpose. Dutch's information had given her the one thing she'd been lacking, the initiative. She was no longer reacting. She was planning. She knew Kane's trap, and she was not going to walk into it. She was going to turn it inside out. She arrived at the mouth of the canyon and dismounted, hiding her horse in a thicket of mesquite. She looked at David's map. The cache was located in a small, circular clearing deep within the canyon, a place the map called the Devil's Anvil. According to Dutch, Kane and his last man, Reno, would be lying in wait, likely on the high ground overlooking the clearing. A simple, brutal ambush. Clara had no intention of going to the Devil's Anvil. The gold was a lure, a piece of metal that had caused nothing but death and misery. Her prize was not the payroll. Her prize was Silas Kane. She spent the rest of the day in a painstaking reconnaissance of the canyon's outer rim. She found their trail. 2 riders. They had entered the canyon and not come out. She found a high, concealed position that gave her a view not of the Devil's Anvil, but of the primary trail leading to it. Kane would be watching the cache. She would be watching the watchers. The waiting was the hardest part. As dusk began to bleed across the sky, casting long, spooky shadows through the canyon, she knew she had to force their hand. She could not wait for them to grow tired and come looking for her. She had to make them believe she was walking into their trap. She took a spare blanket from her saddlebag. She tied it to a long, sturdy branch, creating a crude dummy. As the last light of day faded, she moved to the edge of the canyon, to a point where the trail to the anvil was visible below. She lit a small, quick-burning fire, letting it flare up for just a minute, long enough to be seen. Then she extinguished it. In the near darkness, she began to drag the blanket dummy down the trail, making enough noise to simulate a single person, on foot, moving cautiously through the canyon. From a ridge a quarter-mile away, hidden in a sniper's nest of rocks, Silas Kane saw the brief flare of the fire. His lips twisted into a cruel smile. "She's here," he whispered to Reno, a weary, snake-eyed man crouched beside him. "The fool is actually here. She's on foot, heading right for the gold." "Let's just shoot her now, boss," Reno hissed, raising his rifle. "No," Kane said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Not yet. I want her to get there. I want her to put her hands on the gold. I want to see the hope in her eyes. And then I'm going to blow it all away. Clara dragged the dummy for another 100 yards, then left it propped against a rock in the middle of the trail. She silently scrambled up the canyon wall, circling back towards the ridge where she knew Kane and Reno were hidden. She moved with the skills of a seasoned hunter now, her rage and grief channeled into a pure, silent focus. She came up behind them. They were completely focused on the trail below, their rifles trained on the path leading to the Devil's Anvil, waiting for their phantom prey to appear. They were two wolves staring at a scarecrow, completely unaware of the real wolf at their backs. Clara drew both of David's Colts, the smooth, ivory grips cool and steady in her hands. The moment was surreal. The wind whispered through the rocks, and below, the canyon was a pool of deep, impenetrable darkness. "Looking for me, Silas," she said, her voice quiet but carrying clearly in the still night air. Kane and Reno froze. The voice came from behind them, from the darkness, a place where no one should have been. They spun around, their rifles swinging, their faces masks of stunned disbelief. They saw her then, a silhouette against the star-dusted sky, a gun in each hand. The ghost they had been hunting was real, and she was the one who had set the trap. Reno reacted first, pure instinct. He raised his rifle to fire. Clara shot him once, a clean shot from the left-hand Colt. He collapsed without a sound. Kane was more cunning. He didn't try to fire. He dropped his rifle and dove sideways, rolling behind a large boulder for cover. The dance was not over yet. "Deacon taught you well," Kane yelled from behind the rock, his voice a mixture of fury and a new, grudging respect. "But he didn't teach you everything. You're still just a farmer's wife playing with guns she doesn't understand." He fired blindly from around the rock, the bullets ricocheting wildly. Clara dropped to the ground, the shots whining over her head. She knew she couldn't stay here. He was pinned, but so was she. She had to close the distance. This had to end face to face. The standoff on the ridge was a deadly stalemate. Kane was pinned behind his boulder, Clara behind a smaller outcropping of rock. The moon began to rise, bathing the canyon in a pale, ethereal light, turning the sandstone formations into silver ghosts. "You should have just kept running, Deacon," Kane shouted, his voice echoing in the quiet. "You had the gold. You had a new life. But you couldn't leave it alone, could you? You had to come back for this." "My name is David," came a voice from the darkness. Kane froze. The voice was deep, masculine. It was not the woman's. It came from a different direction. "What trick is this, you bitch?" Kane snarled, his eyes darting into the shadows. From behind a rock to Kane's left, a figure emerged. It was Dutch, the old gunsmith. He held the beautiful rifle he had been working on, and it was aimed steadily at Kane. "I told you, Kane," Dutch said, his voice firm. "I should have stood up to you a long time ago. I'm not making that mistake again." Kane stared, dumbfounded. "Dutch, you sentimental old fool. She's going to kill you, too." "Maybe," Dutch said, "but you're going first." The distraction was all Clara needed. While Kane's attention was on Dutch, she broke from her cover, running in a low crouch, closing the distance. Kane saw the movement at the last second. He spun, firing his pistol wildly. A bullet tore through the sleeve of Clara's duster, but she didn't stop. Dutch fired his rifle. The shot was not aimed to kill. It hit the rock just beside Kane's head, spraying his face with stone fragments and making him cry out in pain and surprise. Clara was on him. She didn't fire. She slammed into him with all her weight, driving her shoulder into his chest. The impact sent them both tumbling to the ground. His pistol flew from his grasp. They rolled in the dust, a desperate, grunting struggle. He was stronger, his hands grabbing for her throat. But she was fueled by a righteous fury. She remembered the derringer Dutch had given her, tucked into her belt. She fumbled for it, her fingers closing around the small, deadly weapon. As Kane's hands tightened on her neck, she brought it up and slammed the sharpened trigger guard into his side. He roared in pain, his grip loosening for just a second. It was enough. She pressed the barrel of the tiny gun against his ribs and pulled the trigger. The sound was a dull pop, almost insignificant compared to the roar of the Colts. But it was just as deadly. Kane's body went rigid. A look of profound surprise crossed his face. He gasped, a bloody froth on his lips, and then collapsed on top of her. It was over. Clara pushed his dead weight off of her and lay on the ground, gasping for air, her heart hammering against her ribs. Dutch rushed to her side. "Are you all right, ma'am?" She nodded, slowly sitting up. The rage, the hate, the burning need for vengeance that had been her constant companion, was gone. In its place was a vast, hollow emptiness. "It's done," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "Yes, ma'am," Dutch said quietly. "It is." Together, they made their way down to the Devil's Anvil. Following the instructions on David's map, they found a loose rock at the base of the central formation. Behind it was a deep cavity, and inside were a dozen heavy, canvas army saddlebags. Clara opened one. It was filled with U.S. Army gold coins, their surfaces gleaming in the moonlight. $50,000. A fortune that had cost the lives of more than 20 men, including the man she loved. It felt dirty, cursed. "What will you do with it?" Dutch asked. Clara looked at the gold, then back up at the silent, watching canyon. She thought of David, the simple farmer who had died trying to escape this very treasure. She thought of the soldiers who had died protecting it. "A debt has to be paid," she said. The journey to Fort Grant, the nearest army outpost, took for days. It was a strange, silent journey. Dutch rode with Clara, a quiet, protective presence. He never asked about her plans, never spoke of the violence they had left behind in Ghost Canyon. He simply rode beside her, as if standing guard over her transition from Avenger back to a person. They arrived at the fort with the gold-laden pack horses in tow. The sentries, seeing a lone woman and an old man with a fortune in army payroll, were first suspicious, then dumbfounded. They were brought before the fort's commander, a stern, gray-haired major named Abernathy. Clara told him a carefully edited version of the truth. She told him her name was Clara Kane. She explained that her late husband, David, had been a member of the Black Creek Marauders, a man who had stolen the gold and spent the last 10 years running, trying to escape his past. She told him that the rest of the gang, led by Silas Kane, had finally caught up to him and killed him. "They believed he had the gold hidden at our homestead," she explained, her voice clear and steady. "When they didn't find it, they went looking for it. I followed them. They killed each other out of greed in a place called Ghost Canyon. I am here to return what was stolen." Major Abernathy listened, his face a stony mask. It was a wild, unbelievable story. But in front of him was the long-lost Black Creek payroll. That was a fact he couldn't ignore. "And you, sir?" Abernathy asked, turning his gaze to Dutch. "I was a member of that gang, a long time ago," Dutch said, his voice filled with a shame that was clearly genuine. "I left that life behind years ago. When I heard Silas Kane was back in the territory, I tried to stop him. I failed to save David, but I helped his widow recover this." He looked Abernathy in the eye. "I know there is a price on my head. I am here to surrender myself to the law." The major was silent for a long time. He looked at the gold. He looked at the old, repentant gunsmith. And he looked at the young widow, her face etched with a grief and a hardness that went far beyond her years. He was a man of the law, but he was also a man of the frontier. He understood that there were different kinds of justice. "As far as the United States Army is concerned," he said finally, his voice decisive, "the Black Creek Marauders were all killed during the original robbery, or have since met their end at each other's hands. The gold has been recovered from an anonymous source. The case is closed." He looked directly at Dutch. "There is no bounty on a ghost, old man. As far as I'm concerned, you died 10 years ago." He then turned to Clara. "The Army offers a finder's fee for recovered property. 10%. $5,000. It's yours, Mrs. Kane. A chance to start a new life." Clara was stunned. She had expected a jail cell, or at the very least, a long and difficult interrogation. She had not expected to be given a future. "Thank you, Major," she whispered. She and Dutch walked out of the commander's office and into the bustling life of the fort. The debt was paid. The ledger was clean. "What will you do now?" Dutch asked. "I don't know," Clara said honestly. "The woman who lived in that cabin is gone. The woman who hunted Silas Kane, I don't want to be her anymore." "You can be whoever you want to be," the old man said gently. "David Deacon, he tried to do that, to build a new life. He succeeded, for a while. You can too." He tipped his hat. "I'm heading east. I hear they need good craftsmen in SD. Lewis. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile. Be well, Clara. She watched him walk away, a man finally unburdened by his past. She was alone now, truly alone, with a bag of army gold and a future that was a completely blank page. Clara did not stay at the fort. She took the money, bought a new, sturdy horse and supplies, and rode away. She did not ride back towards the ashes of her old life. She rode west, towards the setting sun, with no destination in mind. For weeks, she just rode. She let the vast, silent landscapes of the territory wash over her, let the sun and the wind scour the last remnants of the rage and the hate from her soul. The ghost of Deacon and the fury of the widow slowly faded, leaving just Clara. A woman scarred, changed, but whole. One evening, she made camp by a small, clear river. As the sun set, she took out the silver locket, the hawk's eye seeming to catch the last rays of light. This object had started everything. It was the key to a past that had destroyed her life, but also the key that had, in a strange way, set her free. It was a symbol of the outlaw, Deacon. She also took out her wedding band, a simple, thin ring of gold. It was a symbol of the farmer, David. She held one in each hand, weighing them. The outlaw and the farmer. The lie and the truth. The man he was, and the man he had tried to be. She had hated the one and loved the other. But now, she understood that they were the same man. A man who was complex, flawed, and who had, in the end, loved her enough to die for her. She could not discard one without discarding the other. She had to accept all of it. All of him. She opened the locket one last time. She took out the cipher key, the last piece of Deacon's violent past, and let it drift away on the river's current. Then she took off her wedding band and gently placed it inside the locket, alongside the ghost of the man she had married. She snapped it shut. The two halves of his life, finally together. She put the locket back on. It no longer felt like a cold weight of secrets. It felt like a memory, a part of her own story. A story of a woman who had buried her love, and buried a dangerous past, and walked through the fires of vengeance to find herself, alone but unbroken, on the other side. The next morning, she rode on. She didn't know what town she would stop in, what name she would use, or what life she would build. But for the first time, the future was not a terrifying void, but a possibility. She was her own woman, forged in grief and fire, and the open frontier was waiting.